So, provider growth. For some time now, we've had 504 providers, but now with the aged care reforms, we expect many new providers. They'll come from Commonwealth Home Support Programs and HAC programs that exist in Western Australia and Victoria. They'll also come from residential aged care services, from disability services, because we'll be focusing on caring for people, as well as for-profits that are keen to enter into the market. Considerable growth in the short term. Rhonda highlighted trebling over the next 40 years in relation to workforce, which is quite huge. The note to self, and I think this is an important reminder about not being too afraid to make a mistake. However, you may have saved yourself a lot of money by coming to this conference because you may decide not to get into this market. Because you'll be collecting the right information to know whether you're by doing your due diligence, whether you make the jump or not. So a little bit about the 504 providers currently, and it is rather skewed. We have 5% of those providers, just 33, have over 35,000 packages currently. So they have over half the market. And then we have 80%, 400 providers who provide around 7,000 packages. And that's just between 10 and 20 packages each, which is not a lot, and obviously it's attached on to other programs that they have. But they're often the small, more multicultural organisations who've applied over time to have those particular packages. The department has highlighted that they would like more integration of providers, going from home support through packages, through residential aged care. Over 12 months ago, it was reported that only 49 of those organisations in Australia have all three. We mostly have not-for-profits. However, insurance companies like Australian Unity are buying out current providers. An example is in Sydney, the Department of Social Services sold their packaged care to Australian Unity, quite a number of packages fairly recently. And for those of you who are interested and you need to have a bit of a closer look at this in relation to the franchise market, we have examples, and based on an article from the Community Care Review, where Prime Time, they have an entry point of around $60,000. Most aged care franchises are at the lower end of the investment scale, but the necessary funds required in the first year is in the region of $150,000. That's what this particular article was talking about. So to get started, you need an office in the community with a couple of staff. Some people may question whether you need an office anymore. And in this particular article, you need to be able to cover these costs for a year as you're building your income. From that same article, they say the standard franchise territory is around 300,000 to 450,000 residents, but boundaries can be customised to suit the franchisee and extended to whatever size they prefer. Just Better Care is another franchise that is also now in the market. From the consumer perspective, in relation to length of stay, this is really important information, as I was very surprised about it when I uncovered most of this from the Aged Care Financing Authority reports from 2015 and also from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, where we accessed their information in 2016. We find that 30% of packages only go for 6 months. The average length of stay is around 94 weeks, so that's sort of a turnover of 30 to 40% per year, and only a quarter or less than a quarter have packages for 2 to 5 years. So within a 3-year period, there could potentially be a 90% turnover for some providers. It could go up or it could go down. The bottom line is that 90% turnover can actually occur in that period of time. The KPMG report highlighted a number of things that are well worth noting, and this was a report that covered June 2014 to March 2015, and they reported that with the rollout of home care packages that consumers are actually spending more money. Whether that's got to do with the income tested care fee or not, I'm not sure. And then for the first time, consumers are asking questions. They're asking a whole lot more questions. They're becoming more informed. They also highlighted that consumers do want choice. But one of the most important things from this evaluation was that consumers don't know what they don't know. So how do they know what they can receive? You know, they probably not many go onto the internet, and they need to be informed by the providers in relation to what is possible. We're doing our work with peer education as much as we can, but they're still often coming into this particular situation rather confused. Another interesting thing, and I think this certainly backs up what Simon was saying, the consumers rated their satisfaction with home care packages either at 4 or a 5. They are satisfied or very satisfied. So people are reasonably satisfied with the care that's being provided already. However, what that is linked to is the direct care workers and the relationship that they're having with those direct care workers. Very important. So we have 3 broad markets within the older people that home care packages is providing. 70% of those are full pensioners. So out of the, I think there's now around about 82,000 packages that people fill a year, so there's some turnover there. And that part pensioners, around 30%. But that is shrinking and is shrinking over time. Then clearly there is the self-funded retirees of whom you could all be focusing on their care needs right now. So, further market segmentation, you want to be looking at potentially, and you will have more, people that have a chronic illness. You might want to focus on level 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. You might want to focus on some multicultural communities or the LGBTI communities or the most isolated elderly in rural areas or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So you need to do your homework about which of these particular client groups you'd like to be focusing on. And this came from a project that we ran last year around an innovation project, and one organisation just interviewed 10 people that were self-funded retirees. The key issues for them that were coming through were security, transport, health, safety, property maintenance, domestic duties, and they're looking after their lawn and garden. But it's interesting when you dig a little bit deeper what they're asking for. Around security, these particular consumers were saying, help me feel more secure, opening the door to strangers. Help me feel more confident out in the community. So these expressions of needs can become, for you, what would potentially be a service provided. So listening to the consumer's voice and converting what they are saying into services that you provide for them is really important. Rhonda talked a little bit about, are you going to be across Australia or a niche? Are you going to be just focused on a region? These are questions, or are you going to just provide the care coordination or the brokerage as well? Clearly there's going to be, and we've mentioned already from 2017, there will be, from Feb 2017, there will be consumer portability. And although there will be more packages, it is likely that there will be winners and losers of packages. The importance of providing quality services is going to be more important than ever. Okay, a quick overview of the legislation and the legalities from a layperson. What I'd like to cover is firstly the legislation, the Charter of Rights, and then thirdly the operational manual. Let's quickly look at all three. The Aged Care Act of 1997 aims to make sure everyone who needs aged care has access to it regardless of their race, culture, language, gender, economic circumstances or geographic location. The Act promotes high quality care and services that meets consumer needs and to protect their health and their wellbeing. It encourages diverse, flexible and responsive services. Through the Act, consumers' personal, civil, legal and consumer rights are also protected. The Act also ensures that aged care is affordable. It sets out rules for the payments of fees and charges for people who can afford to contribute towards their care and accommodation. We now also find that consumer law is becoming more relevant in a competitive market, highlighting consumers' rights, for example, in things like the agreement between the provider and the consumer. Also emphasising that providers are not going to be able to collude around pricing now and into the future. The Charter is a very important document and needs to be provided or cited by every and to every consumer. It's about their rights and responsibilities. It includes all of the CDC principles around individualised budgets, personal information, confidentiality and comments and complaints that they may need to make. And that's all included in that particular Charter. As a provider, you have to evidence that your consumers have seen the Charter. And also I think you have an interest in also making sure that they understand the Charter. The operational manual probably needs to be read at night time by you for a little while so that you come to grips with it. We'll give you a little bit of an overview with some of Anna's work as she talks about how do you make decisions about what consumers can and can't have. It's updated frequently. The next one will probably be before February 2017. It defines the program. It highlights the legal framework, as I've just mentioned. It gives history of changes, access and eligibility and fees. It does talk about care planning, the agreement, individualised budgets and excluded items. It also highlights around the duty of care and dignity of risk, which I'll now talk a little bit more about. But changes over time in the operational manual, one of the key things that people are noting is that it's not being as directive as it used to be. It's much greyer. So there's less direction, which is very much around encouraging innovation. CDC, Consumer Directed Care, sits within the Charters of the Rights. And in the last operational manual, there was just, for some reason, and not a great deal of clarification, there was a less focus on reablement. Now, fees and charges. It's important to come to grips with this. Sometimes we in the Home Care Today team have sort of tried to work out some of this, and we just imagine how difficult it can be for consumers to really come to grips with some of this. But clearly there's two fees. The basic daily care fee, which is 17.5% of the full pension rate. You'll know that it's $9.93 or $139 a fortnight. It is negotiable and it can be added, but most importantly, it needs to be added to the package value. That is critical. It needs to be added to the package value. There are hardship applications, so you can not have to pay for that fee, or the consumer negotiates it. Then secondly, what's important in making and having quite a big impact on who's taking the home care packages or not, and that's the income tested care fee, where, for example, the individual pension of $20,664, the threshold begins at $25,000. So for a single pensioner at $30,000, they're paying $2,158 a year for their care. So they're making that contribution on top of potentially the 17.5% as well. For couples pension of $31,000, it kicks in at $42,000, and $520 gets paid there by the consumer, and then it peaks, and there are caps. You need to understand about what the caps are, and the pensioners don't have to pay anymore once they've reached those caps. Stefan's in the room, and he's the person who's done a lot of work on this area. He's up at the back. If you want to have a chat a little bit more around fees, then it could be worthwhile to have a chat to Stefan. The basics again, people should be aware that we're looking at basic care needs level 1, low level care needs level 2, intermediate care needs level 3, and then high level care needs up to $48,000. The consumer agreement, clearly need to look at the operational manual. We have a Home Care Today guide, and we actually have an agreement on our website that has been prepared by a consumer who's gone through it to make sure it is in consumer language. We need to be aware of consumer law, but we also, in relation to the agreement, need to make sure that we're keeping it as simple as possible. You can have a folder of a whole lot of information that can be provided, and then a shorter agreement that doesn't confuse the older person. Our message is keep it simple. In relation to adaptations that providers are currently needing to make, are essentially, particularly around the case management role, is becoming an advisory role, and that's a really important recognition, but it's also more than just an advisory role. Those case managers are now needing to, as well as have great communication skills and ability to plan and empower a consumer, they've got to be able to understand all the finances. They've got to be able to also almost be a person that's marketing the organisation. So they need to have those three roles well within what they're doing. The workforce changes have included the whole workforce, in some organisations being introduced to customer service training, which may be a little bit surprising. However, that's exactly what they've needed to do, is to much more focus on customer service. And for direct care workers, they are now being more empowered to work flexibly with their consumers rather than having to ring up the case manager all the time. Can I do this? Can't I do that? They are now needing to be much more empowered to work closely with their consumer. Finally, providers are listening much more to what their consumers want through care planning and evaluation processes. That's certainly happening out there. So organisations don't want to be like that polar bear sitting on an iceberg that's fast melting. There's a whole issue of what does it mean to partner, and I think that models of partnering can be much more explored in what will become a complicated market-driven environment. So don't be isolated like the polar bear. Now finally, just in relation to some take-home messages, it really is about understanding the context, needing to understand the law and the guidelines, understanding consumer need, building systems and processes around your policies. That's going to be critical. And as I mentioned, the group Breaking New Ground, and their information is on the table. They already have established policies and approaches that you can have a look at and see if it's worthwhile buying them off the shelf that you can adapt. But ultimately, it's about, don't forget, it's about the relationship with your client. Thank you.